Alright, how's it going? Post-fight, Chris Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn, okay? I picked Conor Benn to win a decision. I was wrong. My prediction was wrong. I was basing it on the fact that Chris Eubank Jr. had to weigh in the day of the fight. Okay, he had a 10-pound rehydration clause that I thought would leave him very much depleted, and I do think he wasn't as strong as he normally is. I do think he was lacking a little bit of strength in the ring, but he still had enough to beat Conor Benn, right? I think he won off pure grit and will, because early in the fight it looked like Conor Benn was the stronger, was the faster. He landed a couple of big punches, one of which rocked Junior. But then, I don't know if it was the pressure from Chris Eubank Jr. or Conor Benn going away from the game plan. But around round 5 or 6, Eubank took over. He was really dominant from 6 to 12. I don't mean dominant as in he completely destroyed Benn and won all those rounds, but he won the majority of those rounds, rounds 6 to 12. And he was the dominant fighter in those rounds. It couldn't be mistaken that he was bigger, stronger, more effective, and he just wanted to win more. Like I say, he had the will, he had the grit, he refused to lose. Conor Benn started off good. His head movement was good, which I alluded to in my prediction video. He's got good head movement when he uses it. When he gets low and uses that head movement, he can slip a jab, which he was doing early in the fight. But then, the pressure from Eubank, and I think Conor Benn himself, looking for haymakers instead of boxing, he went away from that early success that he had. Because Conor Benn, he was using a good jab in the early rounds, which even I was surprised with. I thought Eubank Jr. would definitely win the jab battle, which he did, as the fight went on. But Conor Benn actually, he had a quick, sharp jab early in the fight. Landed it a couple of times, very well. And like I say, he was the sharper fighter early in the fight. But then he faded and Chris Eubank Jr. came on strong. So, big credit to both guys, but especially Eubank. He just, like I said, he refused to lose this fight. I think there was too much pride on the line, being the bigger fighter, being the older fighter, being the more experienced, and having the name. I know Conor Benn has the name as well, but his father, Eubank Sr., didn't lose to Nigel Benn, right? So Conor Benn, from Conor Benn's perspective, he's going out there to try to get a win for the Benns, but there's no real pressure on him because he's the smaller guy, less experienced, so on and so forth. Whereas Eubank had that pressure of being, the more experienced fighter, the bigger fighter, the natural middleweight. If he had lost to Conor Benn, it's a lot more humiliating to him, so he couldn't lose this fight. He refused to lose, and that showed in his performance, especially late in the fight, the way he pushed himself to dominate the later rounds. even while being dehydrated from the weight clause. And it was a great performance. It was a bit of a scrappy fight. Okay, it's these weren't two polished boxers at a high level. They're at a good level. These guys, they were at a decent level, or they both are at a good level. But it did get scrappy in there, especially from Conor Benn. Swinging punches, especially mid to late rounds, instead of boxing. Yeah, I think Conor Benn could have done a lot better if he had stuck to his boxing, being that he was sharper in the early rounds. But credit to Junior as well for putting on the pressure, and making it hard for Conor to fight that way, because Eubank was just at a certain point in the fight was just pushing Conor back, right, pushing him into the ropes, and making it a brawl. So Conor went away from his early boxing, but at the same time Chris Eubank Jr. in a way took that away from him by being the bigger man and bullying Conor Benn against the ropes, and just out hustling him, outworking him, showing more will to win. So yeah, overall it was a great fight. Do I want to see the rematch? I don't think Conor Benn can win. After watching that, I struggle to see a way where Conor Benn wins the fight. I think it'll just be the same as this fight. I think it'll be the same thing. Conor Benn, the size was a problem, right? The size, the strength, the fact that Eubank is the natural middleweight, it was a big factor. So I don't think anything changes in a second fight, so I don't see a need for it. I just, no matter how Conor Benn prepares for the second fight, I think it goes the same way. And does Chris Eubank Jr. want to do that again? Does he want to get down to 160 and have these penalties, pay these penalties if he misses the weight, and have this rehydration clause again? He went to hospital after the fight for a reason, which the reason they're saying is mostly because he was dehydrated. So does he want to do that again? I don't think so. But there's obviously a lot of money on the line if they do it again. If they both get offered $20-30 million to do it again, they probably will. But do I want to see it personally? No, because I just, when thinking about the fight itself and the intrigue about who's going to win and how it's going to happen, like how the fight's going to go, we've seen it, and I don't think that's going to change. I don't think, Conor Benn is not going to get bigger. He's not going to get longer reach. He's not going to get more powerful. The only thing that could happen in a rematch is Eubank Jr. drains himself worse than he did in this fight, and he comes in worse shape, and then it gives Conor Benn the advantage. That's the only thing I can think of that would change a second fight, is if Eubank Jr. comes into the second fight in worse shape than he did in this fight. But if both guys come in the same sort of shape, Eubank comes in just as he did in this fight, and Ben trains as hard as he possibly can, Eubank still wins. Because he showed he's got something else. He shows he's got, more will to win. And on top of that, he's got all the physical advantages, of in height and reach and being a bigger man, So I just don't see any difference in a rematch. That's the way I see it. All right, great fight overall, great event. The atmosphere looked incredible. But yeah, I just don't see a need for a rematch. Chris Eubank Jr. won, well deserved, and that's how I saw it. Let me know what you thought.